Welcome to the latest interview in the series we're holding to mark the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Committee for a Workers' International, the CWI. Today we're going to have a discussion with Anton McCabe, who's a long-standing member of the Irish section of the CWI, and Anton joined in the same year in Ireland that the CWI had its founding conference in 1974. So welcome, Anton.
Welcome, Niall, and I'm sorry for having to correct you, but I actually joined at the end of October 1972, which was about 18 months before we had the founding conference. And I remember that I joined because I was a young fella from the north, from Omagh in Northern Ireland. I'd come down to Dublin to go to university. I think, like a lot of people, I had been particularly radicalised by internment in the north because a lot of my mates were socialist and had been trying to convince me. And to be fair to the fellas, I had been resisting them. But then I realised, I think it was I later understood it when a sort of Trotsky said it, that you can ignore the dialectic, but it doesn't ignore you. I realised, I suppose, all the horrors of the British state had in store for the North. But I was also a sort of looking around too, because to me, just a sort of the armed struggle of the IRA didn't look like it was a way forward. I would have come from an area in a state that was maybe predominantly Catholic, but quite a bit mixed. And I realised from my own personal experience that you just couldn't wipe out the Protestant population in the North. And in fact, when I had been younger, the family had been living in an almost entirely Protestant estate. And I realised that you couldn't talk about building socialism, about building a new society, without considering that community. And I also realised that, at that time, there was this tendency of a lot of the groups on the left to just dismiss them. I think I kind of personally too, one of the things that got me was that the militant had a serious attitude towards the working class. Even though at that stage in Ireland, like, we were tiny. Like, I was the third comrade in Dublin. We're talking about that far back. But one of the things is the militant would have historically always done its best to speak to the workers in the workers' language. Not dumbing things down, not avoiding the hard questions or nothing like that. I've seen it as something that was serious, tiny as it was, and was therefore worth spending my time on.
And Anton, the CWI founding conference took place in April 1974. So when did the Irish founding conference take place?
The Irish founding conference, as far as I can remember, we were either a month or two later. It was either the late spring or early summer of 1974. I remember it was a really fine couple of days, and we were in a national school, a primary school out in Tala. There was maybe about 30 of us or so, or maybe a bit more. But I think too, we were overwhelmingly young, largely working class. full of enthusiasm. And I think particularly too, it was taking place to a background of upheaval. That really, on the one hand, maybe you had what was going on in the north. Obviously, there was that apparent danger of slide into civil war. In the south, it was to a background of real industrial upheaval. Like I can remember, you'd be going on the bus through the centre of Dublin, and you would see a picket line. So you would get off the bus, and you'd walk over and talk to the workers on the picket line. And that was a very, it was a very important education that maybe a sort of wouldn't for a good while have been available to a lot of young people who came around socialism. You were actually looking at, at workers in action. Now, as I said, I always remember that conference was enthusiastic. With comrades in Dublin, we had this small group in Belfast, small group in Derry, a couple of comrades in Strabane. And as I said, I think particularly in the spirit of the times, the big thing about it is it was hugely optimistic.
Thanks, Anton. I mean, I think that just brings home the point that we can trace our history of ideas in Ireland. It's a red lineage, if you like, that goes through Irish history. As far as we're concerned, all the way back to figures like James Connolly and Jim Larkin. And, we would rest on their shoulders and obviously updating our programme. And then in the early days, in the of our organisation, of Militant in the CWI, we relied a lot on internationalism. In the late 1960s, it was young students coming from Britain over to Coleraine University at the University of Ulster and getting involved in the civil rights struggle that helped us to retie the knot of Trotskyism in Ireland, which had been sort of partially broken from the 1940s and 50s onwards. And we were able to do that, and then the involvement of other comrades in Britain like Peter Taff, who went over on regular visits in the early years and worked with the comrades there and helped to develop our position on the national question at that stage. And I think you're right. What marks us out is that we don't have a static or dogmatic point of view, and we look at changing circumstances. And we don't have time to go into today, but there's a whole array of challenges in front of the Marxists in Ireland now, with the demands for border poll, the rise of Sinn Féin, the demographic changes in the north, post-Brexit, the situation in the south, where there's been big changes as well over the last 2 decades. It's a very different picture to 1974, but I suppose we can agree that fundamentally it's still the same tasks for Marxists. We want to unite the working class. We want to transform society along socialist lines, and in that way we can change lives fundamentally, and finally begin to resolve the sectarian divisions on the national question. So anyway, Anton, thanks a lot for those very useful, interesting points. And good luck with the work in the north and the south and building the forces of the CWI.
Thank you, Comrade.